The old man's hands trembled as he clutched the armrests, his sharp eyes locking onto hers with a look that said he knew something she didn't, a secret heavy enough to bring this plane down. But Karoline Leavitt had no idea what she'd just stepped into when she boarded the flight from Washington, D.C. to Manchester, New Hampshire. All she wanted was a break. The weight of her job as White House press secretary, the youngest in history at 27, pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. Endless briefings, hostile reporters, and the relentless grind of politics had drained her dry. She'd spent the day dodging questions, deflecting scandals, and keeping her cool under fire. Now, with her carry-on slung over her shoulder, she moved through the crowded aisle, craving the quiet of her first-class seat. 1A home was calling Hampstead, New Hampshire, where she could breathe again, even if just for a weekend. The plane was packed, a claustrophobic mess of shifting bodies and low murmurs. The air carried the sharp bite of coffee mixed with the stale tang of worn leather seats. Every row was full, passengers already jostling for elbow room or burying their noses in their phones. Karoline didn't care about luxury. First class was just a perk of the job, a rare pocket of calm before the storm of Monday hit. She reached her seat, dropped her bag under the one in front, and sank into it, letting out a slow breath. The tension in her shoulders started to ease. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the familiar streets of Hampstead, the simplicity she'd left behind when she ran for Congress at 25, the youngest candidate in U.S. history, and lost, only to claw her way into the White House anyway. Then she saw him. An old man, frail but deliberate, shuffled down the aisle. His worn jacket hung loose on his thin frame, and a faded cap sat on his head, emblazoned with WW2 Veteran in stitched letters that looked earned, not bought. John Hargrove, that's what the flight attendant called him as she pointed him toward 26B, way back in economy. He gripped each seat for support, his steps slow but steady, like a man who'd walk through hell and come out the other side. Karoline watched him, something tugging at her gut. The tight rows back there, the lack of space. It didn't feel right for someone like him. She'd grown up hearing stories of sacrifice from her grandparents in Hampstead. This wasn't just an old guy. This was history limping past her. She stood before she could overthink it. "Sir," she said, stepping into the aisle. He paused, startled, his cloudy eyes meeting hers, sharp despite his age. "Yes?" His voice rasped, cautious. Karoline gestured to her seat. "I'd be honored if you'd take my spot up here." A beat of silence stretched between them. He blinked, surprised. "Oh, no, I couldn't." "Please," she cut in, firm but warm. "You've done enough for this country. Let me do this." He studied her, then chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Well, if you insist." The flight attendant stepped in, smiling. "That's very kind of you, Ms. Leavitt." Heads turned. A few passengers noticed, some nodding, others indifferent. But not everyone was impressed. As Karoline grabbed her bag to head back to 26B, a gruff voice cut through the hum of the cabin. "Oh, come on, really?" She turned. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled polo shirt, Henry Walsh according to his boarding pass sticking out of his pocket, glared at her from 26C, right next to her new seat. "We're all tired, lady. You holding up the line for some grand gesture isn't helping anyone." His tone dripped with irritation, loud enough to draw eyes. Karoline's jaw tightened. The exhaustion flared into a spark of anger, but she swallowed it. "It's just a seat," she said evenly, brushing past him. He snorted. "Yeah, sure. Play the hero." She slid into 26B, sandwiched between Henry and a window that showed nothing but darkness. The plane groaned as the doors shut, a tired sigh from a machine ready to move. Henry shifted, elbow jabbing her side as he muttered, "Whole damn flight's gonna be late now." Karoline ignored him, focusing on the old man settling into 1A. He adjusted the recline with slow, deliberate hands, then glanced back at her, just for a second, but long enough to send a chill down her spine. There was something in that look, something heavy. She shook it off, chalking it up to fatigue. The cabin lights dimmed, engines rumbled, and she leaned her head back, dreaming of Hampstead's quiet streets. Home felt close, yet so far. Henry muttered again, louder this time. "People like you think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Slowing us all down." His voice grated, sharp and personal. Karoline clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She'd faced worse from reporters. This guy was nothing. Still, the jab stung, and the air between them crackled with tension. She had no clue that giving up her seat was about to drag her into a nightmare, one where Henry Walsh's petty gripes would be the least of her problems. Karoline Leavitt slid into 26B, her new seat in economy, and immediately felt Henry Walsh's elbow dig into her side. The middle-aged man next to her huffed, his breath sour with irritation. "Nice job, Princess," he snapped, loud enough for nearby heads to turn. "What's next, a press conference about your big sacrifice? Little political brat who loves the spotlight?" Karoline's fist clenched in her lap, the exhaustion from her day boiling into something hotter. She dealt with worse, heckling reporters, smear campaigns, but this guy was relentless, and she was trapped next to him. "Lay off," she said, voice low but edged. "It's a seat, not a headline." Henry smirked, leaning closer, his polo shirt creasing. "Oh, right. Ms. White House press secretary, huh? Lost that election in 22 but still wormed your way in. Guess it pays to play the good girl." Her jaw locked. He dug into her past, her failed congressional run at 25, the youngest candidate ever, and twisted it like a knife. She wanted to fire back, remind him she'd earned her spot, but she bit her tongue. The plane's engines hummed, a shaky vibration underscoring the tension. Up ahead, John Hargrove settled into 1A. The old man's frail hands adjusted his WW2 veteran cap, its faded letters a quiet badge of honor. His face was lined with age, but his eyes, sharp as a blade cutting through fog, flickered with something deeper, something anxious. Karoline caught him glancing back again, a quick, piercing look that made her stomach tighten. What was he hiding? Before she could dwell on it, Henry jabbed again. "You're staring at him like he's your next photo op. Pathetic." "Enough," she hissed, turning to face him. "You don't know me, and I don't owe you a damn thing." Henry's eyes narrowed, his voice rising. "Oh, I know your type. All fake smiles and handouts, thinking you're better than us, slowing down this flight for your ego trip." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, but Karoline held his gaze, her pulse pounding. "Keep talking," she said coldly. "You're the only one making a scene," he scoffed, crossing his arms. "We'll see who's the fool when we're stuck here 'cause of you." A soft voice cut through the standoff. "You don't get it, do you?" Karoline turned to her left. A woman in 24C, Sarah Bennett, judging by the name scribbled on her boarding pass, leaned across the aisle, her tone conspiratorial. "That guy up there? John Hargrove? He's not just some vet." Karoline frowned, wary but curious. "What do you mean?" Sarah's lips curled into a half-smile, her eyes glinting. "TA, Black Ops after the war. Disappeared in the 70s. Poof. Gone. People like him don't just pop up on random flights." Her words hung heavy, dripping with implication. Karoline's mind raced. CIA? Disappeared? Sarah sounded like a tabloid junkie, but that look from Hargrove, those eyes, backed her up. "How do you know that?" she asked, voice steady despite her unease. Sarah shrugged. "Too casual. I hear things. Point is, you just handed your seat to a ghost with secrets." Henry snorted, jumping back in. "Great. Now we've got a conspiracy nut, too. You two deserve each other." Sarah shot him a glare. "Laugh all you want, buddy. Something's off with this flight. And he's why." As if on cue, the cabin lights flickered. A murmur rippled through the plane and the overhead speaker crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay," the captain said, his voice clipped. "Please remain seated." The lights blinked again, then steadied. Karoline's gut twisted. Something was wrong, very wrong. She glanced at Hargrove. He sat still, hands folded, but his jaw was tight, like he knew what was coming. Her eyes darted across the cabin. A man in 22A, David Kessler, she guessed from his visible ID tag, caught her attention. He wasn't like the others, distracted by phones or magazines. He stared at Hargrove, unblinking, scribbling something into his phone with quick, jerky taps. Every few seconds he'd look up, tracking the old man's every move. Karoline's skin prickled. Who was he? Another passenger shifted beside him, oblivious. But David's focus never wavered. It was deliberate, obsessive. Henry noticed her staring. "What now, huh? spotting more heroes to save. His sarcasm grated, but she ignored him, leaning towards Sarah. That guy in 22A, he's watching Hargrove too, you see that? Sarah nodded, her smirk fading. Told you, something's up. Henry rolled his eyes. Oh, please. You're both paranoid, probably some intern tweeting about your little stunt. Karoline snapped back, patience gone. If I'm paranoid, why's your voice shaking? He flinched, caught off guard, then muttered. Screw you, lady. The plane jolted, a sharp, sudden lurch. A woman gasped nearby and Karoline gripped her armrests. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Henry's bravado cracked. What the hell was that? He barked loud enough to turn heads. Sarah's whisper was ice-cold. Told you, it's him. Karoline's heart hammered. She looked at Hargrove again. He hadn't moved, but his eyes met hers once more, steady and unreadable. There was something wrong, very wrong. And it wasn't just the plane. Henry seized the moment, his voice rising. This is on you, Leavitt, you and your stupid games. We're all screwed now. Karoline rounded on him, fury breaking through. You want to blame me, fine, but shut up and let me think. He opened his mouth, then stopped, glaring daggers. Sarah leaned in again. Ignore him. Whatever Hargrove's got, it's big. And someone on this plane doesn't want him to land with it. David Kessler tapped his phone again, faster now, and the cabin lights dimmed once more. Karoline's breath caught. Something was wrong, very wrong, and she was stuck right in the middle of it. Karoline Leavitt's pulse raced as two men in dark jackets approached her row. The taller one, James Carter, flashed an FAA badge, his eyes cold and unyielding. Ms. Leavitt, he said, voice clipped, we need to talk about John Hargrove. Beside him, Robert Pierce offered a thin smile, too smooth to trust. Just a few questions, he added, leaning in. Won't take long. Karoline's stomach churned, but she squared her shoulders, channeling the grit that had carried her through her congressional run. What's this about? She asked, keeping her tone steady. Carter didn't blink. He might be carrying classified material. National security's at stake. You spoke to him? What did he say? His words hit like a punch. Classified material? Hargrove? She opened her mouth to respond, but Henry Walsh cut in, his voice booming from 26C. Oh, I knew it. She's in on it, isn't she? Little Miss Perfect's playing spy now. Heads turned, eyes widening. Karoline glared at him. Shut up, Henry. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He sneered, leaning forward. You gave him your seat, cozying up like some patriot. Now these suits are here? Bet you're smuggling something for him, his accusation rang out, sharp and venomous. A woman nearby gasped, clutching her armrest. Carter's jaw tightened, but he ignored Walsh, pressing Karoline. Answer the question. What did Hargrove tell you? She hesitated, fear creeping in, but her resolve hardened. Nothing, I just gave him my seat. That's it. Pierce tilted his head, his fake friendliness grating. Come on, Karoline, you're smart. Ex-candidate, press secretary, you don't miss details. Help us out here. She bristled at the condescension. I don't know anything, and I'm not your informant. Carter stepped closer, voice dropping. You sure about that? One call? And your career's toast. You want to lose everything you've built? The threat stung, a reminder of how fragile her rise had been. Losing in 22, clawing into the White House. She clenched her fists, defiance flaring. Try it. I've faced worse than you. Before Carter could snap back, a raspy voice called out. Ms. Leavitt? It was Hargrove, standing at 1A, his frail frame trembling but his eyes blazing. Come here, now. Passengers stared as she pushed past the agents, Henry shouting after her. See? She's his little errand girl. Karoline ignored him, reaching Hargrove. He gripped her arm, his fingers surprisingly strong, and shoved a worn black bag into her hands. They're watching me, he whispered, voice urgent. You have to keep this. Her breath caught. What? Why me? He leaned closer, eyes wild. Because you're the only one I trust. She unzipped the bag just enough to peek inside. A sealed envelope with a government stamp and a small USB drive. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't some old vet's keepsake. This was trouble, the kind that could sink her. Hargrove's grip tightened. Don't let them get it. Before she could argue, Henry's voice erupted again, louder, unhinged. She's got something. Look at her. Hiding it. She's a damn traitor! The cabin exploded into chaos. A man in 25D yelled, "What's in the bag?" A woman screamed, "Are we in danger?" Panic spread like wildfire. Carter spun toward Walsh. "Sit down and shut up," he barked, but it was too late. Henry stood, pointing at Karoline. "She's working with him, probably selling us out right now." Karoline whirled on him, fear morphing into fury. "You're insane! I don't even know what this is!" Henry laughed, bitter and loud. "Sure you don't. That's why you're clutching it like gold. What's the payoff, huh? White House not enough?" She stepped toward him, voice shaking with rage. "Keep pushing me, Henry. See what happens." The plane lurched violently, cutting off their standoff. A deep growl rumbled through the cabin, like a wounded beast roaring in pain. Overhead bins rattled and oxygen masks dropped, dangling like grim pendulums. Screams erupted as passengers fumbled for them. Karoline stumbled, clutching the bag, her mind racing. The speaker crackled, the captain's voice breaking through. "Ladies and gentlemen, please." Static swallowed his words, replaced by a colder, unfamiliar tone. "This is a priority directive. Prepare for immediate rerouting." The line went dead. Henry's face paled, but he doubled down, shouting over the din. "This is her fault, her and that old bastard!" A few passengers nodded, their fear turning to anger. One yelled, "What's she hiding?" Karoline backed toward 1A, Hargrove steadying her. "Ignore them," he muttered. "They don't know." She glared at him, voice low. "But I don't either. What the hell is this?" He didn't answer, just pointed to the bag. "Keep it safe." Carter and Pierce shoved through the chaos, reaching her. Carter's eyes flicked to the bag, narrowing. "Hand it over, Leavitt, now." She clutched it tighter, shaking her head. "Not until you tell me what's going on." Pierce tried his charm again, voice oily. "We're on your side, Karoline. Just cooperate." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Like hell you are." "You're lying. I can smell it." Carter's patience snapped. "You're in over your head. Give it up, or I'll take it." Henry seized the moment, lunging toward her. "She's a traitor! Grab it!" A passenger joined him, reaching for the bag. Karoline yanked it back, shoving Henry hard. "Touch me again, and I'll break your nose." He staggered, furious. "You're done, Leavitt. Done." The plane jolted again, harder, drowning his rant in a chorus of screams. Hargrove pulled her close, whispering, "They know, they know, they know." The repetition chilled her to the bone. Carter grabbed Hargrove's arm, dragging him toward the cockpit. "You're coming with us," he snarled. Pierce stayed, eyeing Karoline. "Last chance," he said, voice soft but menacing. She stared him down, heart pounding, the bag a lead weight in her hands. "Go to hell," she spat. He smirked, stepping back as the plane shuddered again. Passengers were yelling now, some at her, some at the agents. Henry kept up his tirade. "She's going to kill us all." A woman sobbed. "What's happening?" Karoline sank into 1A, gripping the bag, fear and determination warring inside her. She'd fought tooth and nail to get where she was. Lost an election, faced the press's wrath, and still stood tall. She wasn't about to fold now, not for Carter's threats or Walsh's venom, but as the plane groaned and the mask swayed, one thought gnawed at her. They know. They know. They know. Whatever was in this bag, it was bigger than her, and it might just bring them all down. The cabin descended into chaos as James Carter and Robert Pierce hauled John Hargrove toward the cockpit, his frail figure vanishing behind the reinforced door. Screams ricocheted off the walls, passengers grappling with oxygen masks as the plane shuddered beneath them. Karoline Leavitt sat in 1A, the black bag in her lap, like a bomb waiting to blow. Her hands trembled, but she gripped it tighter, her mind a battlefield of fear and resolve. She'd fought through election smears and press ambushes. She could handle this. But the weight of Hargrove's words, "There, watching me," gnawed at her, and now she was alone with his secrets. Sarah Bennett's voice sliced through the noise. "What's in the bag, Leavitt?" She leaned across from 24C, eyes glinting with something sharp. Hunger, maybe. "I'm a freelance journalist. Whatever's in there, I can expose it. Let me see." Karoline's gut twisted. Sarah's truth-seeker act felt flimsy, like a mask hiding something uglier. "No," she said flatly, pulling the bag closer. Sarah's face hardened. "You don't get it. This could be huge. Government corruption, CIA cover-ups. I'm your ally here." Before Karoline could snap back, David Kessler loomed up from 22A, his voice low and urgent. "Don't listen to her, that bag's not safe with you." His eyes darted to Sarah, then back. "I'm Hargrove's protector. Been tracking him for years. Give it to me, I'll keep you out of this." Karoline's head spun. Protector? Journalist? The bag burned against her thighs, a live wire she couldn't drop. "Why should I trust you?" she shot at David. He leaned in, intense. "Because I know what they'll do to you if they find it." Sarah laughed, sharp and mocking. "Oh, please, Kessler. Protector, you're a washed-up stalker chasing ghosts. I'm the one who can make this public, save lives." David's jaw clenched. "Public? You'll sell it to the highest bidder, you hack. I've seen Hargrove's enemies. I know what's at stake." Their voices clashed, rising over the din, each word a jab in a fight Karoline hadn't signed up for. "You're delusional," Sarah spat. "And you're a liar," David fired back. Karoline's pulse hammered. Trust who? Trust who? Trust who? Henry Walsh's bellow cut through their duel. "She's got it right there!" He stood in 26C, pointing at her, his face red with fury. "That traitor's hiding something, probably why we're all gonna die." Passengers turned, fear twisting into anger. A burly guy in 25D growled, "What she got?" A woman in 27B clutched her mask, sobbing, "Is it a bomb?" Henry seized the moment, his voice venomous. She's a political snake, lost her election, slithered into the White House, and now she's screwing us all. Get that bag. Karoline shot to her feet, adrenaline surging. "Back off, Henry. You don't know a damned thing." He stepped closer, egging on the crowd. "Oh, I know plenty, Leavitt. You're a turncoat. Bet you're in bed with those suits, too." The burly guy lumbered forward, fists clenched. "Hand it over, lady." Karoline's heart slammed against her ribs. She could feel the mob forming, their panic feeding off Henry's rage. "Touch me," she warned, voice steel, "and I'll make you regret it." He smirked, but the guy hesitated, thrown by her fire. Sarah jumped in, voice shrill. "Don't be stupid, Karoline. Give it to me. I'll tell the world. You can't handle this." David shoved past her, blocking Henry's path. "No, she gives it to me. I'm the only one who can keep it safe." Sarah grabbed his arm, yanking him back. "Safe? You'll bury it like Hargrove did." David shook her off, furious. "And you'll splash it across headlines for a paycheck." Their shouting overlapped, a tangle of accusations drowning out the cries around them. Karoline's head throbbed. Trust who? Trust who? Trust who? Henry lunged, shoving David aside. "Enough of this crap. I'll take it myself." His hand swiped at the bag, but Karoline twisted away, slamming her elbow into his chest. He stumbled back, wheezing. "You little..." The burly guy grabbed her arm, wrenching it hard. "Give it up." Pain flared in her arm, but she kicked his shin, breaking free. "Get off me," she roared, clutching the bag like a lifeline. The woman in 27B screamed, "She's crazy!" Henry rallied them, panting. "See, she's guilty. Rip it from her." Karoline's breath came in gasps, her mind racing. Survival screamed at her to run, to ditch the bag and save herself. But Hargrove's face flashed in her head, those sharp, pleading eyes. He'd trusted her, thrust this burden on her. She couldn't just toss it away, not after everything she'd fought for. Losing in 22, enduring the jeers, proving herself in DC duty clawed at her, battling the instinct to flee. The bag wasn't just a threat, it was a choice, and she was running out of time to make it. Through the chaos, she glimpsed Hargrove's cap near the cockpit door, still out of reach, as Carter and Pierce's voices faded into urgent murmurs. The intercom crackled and the captain's voice burst through, raw and desperate. "Don't land this plane!" A sharp hiss of static followed, then nothing. Just dead air. Karoline Leavitt's heart slammed against her ribs as she gripped the black bag in 1A, the cabin buzzing with panic. Passengers clutched their masks, some shouting, others sobbing, but before anyone could process the warning, the plane steadied. The engines smoothed out, humming like the chaos had been a bad dream. But the silence from the cockpit was louder than any scream, a void that swallowed every ounce of calm she'd clung to. Footsteps pounded down the aisle. James Carter loomed over her, his FAA badge glinting, his face twisted with barely contained rage. "Give me the bag, Leavitt," he barked. hand outstretched. "You're in deep now. Don't make it worse." Karoline's breath hitched, but she squared her shoulders, the same steel she'd summoned during her 22 campaign shining through. "Back off," she snapped, pulling the bag tighter. "I don't know what's in it, and I'm not your pawn." His eyes narrowed, venom dripping from his words. "You think you're untouchable? White House won't save you when this blows up. Hand it over, or I'll rip it from you." She stood, defiance flaring. "Try it. See how fast I make this public." Carter's fist clenched, but Robert Pierce stepped in, his voice slick. "Easy, Karoline, we're just trying to keep everyone safe. Help us out here." She glared at him. "Safe? You dragged Hargrove off like a criminal. Tell me what's going on, or I'm not budging." Carter laughed, cold and bitter. "You're clueless, aren't you? That old man's a walking liability, and you're holding his mess. Last chance. Give it up." Henry Walsh's voice erupted from the back. "She's stalling! She's in on it!" His shouts carried over the murmurs, reigniting the mob. "Get that bag!" Karoline spun toward him, fury boiling. "Shut your mouth, Henry. You're the only liability here." He pushed forward, elbowing past seats. "Oh, I'll shut up when you're exposed, traitor." Carter ignored him, lunging for the bag. Karoline twisted away, her pulse racing, but then Sarah Bennett struck. The woman from 24C darted in, her hand snatching the bag from Karoline's grip with a feral yell. "I've got it!" Sarah shouted, clutching it to her chest. "I'm a journalist! This ends now!" Karoline lunged after her, stunned. "Sarah, no!" But Sarah shoved through the crowd, heading for the front, her voice rising. "The world's gonna know everything. CIA secrets, all of it!" Karoline's hand shot to the bag's zipper as Sarah pulled away and froze. The USB drive was still in her palm, slipped out during the chaos. Sarah had the envelope, but not this. "Stop her!" Henry roared, but the plane jolted again, throwing everyone off balance. Sarah stumbled forward, disappearing into the throng near the galley. Karoline's mind raced, the USB a hot coal in her hand. She'd lost the bag, but this could be everything. Carter whirled on her, eyes blazing. "Where's the rest of it?" he demanded, grabbing her arm. She yanked free, shoving the USB into her pocket. "Gone?" She lied, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "She took it all." He studied her, suspicion flickering, then cursed under his breath. "You're a fool, Leavitt. This isn't over." The overhead speaker hummed, and a new voice, calm, robotic, cut through. "Prepare for emergency landing." The plane tilted downward, engines whining. Carter shot her one last glare, then bolted toward the cockpit, Pierce following close behind. Karoline sank back into 1A, her breath shallow. She glanced toward the front. Hargrove was gone, whisked away by the agents, alive but out of sight. What had they done with him? And Sarah? Where was she taking that envelope? The USB burned in her pocket. A secret she hadn't asked for but couldn't let go. Henry kept yelling, his voice hoarse. "She's still hiding something. Don't let her off!" A few passengers nodded, but most were too rattled to care, fumbling with belts as the plane descended. Karoline ignored him, her mind spinning. Sarah's betrayal stung. She'd trusted her, even for a moment, and now the bag was gone. But the USB? That was hers now, and whatever was on it, it had turned this flight into a war zone. The wheels hit the ground with a jolt, screeching against an unseen runway. Darkness pressed against the windows. No lights, no signs. Just an airstrip lost in the void. The doors opened and passengers spilled out, a frantic herd. Carter and Pierce emerged from the cockpit, Hargrove nowhere in sight, their faces unreadable as they barked orders at the crew. Karoline slipped into the crowd, head down, the USB a silent wait. She scanned for Sarah. Nothing. Sarah shoved through the crowd and slipped toward an emergency exit as the doors opened, her figure lost in the rush. Henry stormed past, muttering, "This ain't over, Leavitt," but he kept moving, his venom spent. The agents lingered, watching her, but didn't approach. Whatever they'd wanted, they'd lost control of it now. She stepped onto the tarmac, the air cold and biting. The plane stood silent, as if holding its breath for her choice. Passengers milled around, some shouting, others dazed, but Karoline stood apart, her hand slipping into her pocket. The USB rested there, small but heavy, the truth locked inside it like a double-edged blade, cutting both ways. She pulled it out, rolling it between her fingers, her mind flashing back. Losing in 22, the brutal campaign, the jeers she'd faced, the grind to the White House. She'd fought for every inch, clawed her way up. "Is this worth risking it all again?" she murmured, voice lost in the wind. No buses came, no cars, just the dark stretching out, endless and unanswered. Carter and Pierce disappeared into a shadow near the plane, their backs to her. Hargrove's fate gnawed at her. Where was he? What had he started? Sarah was out there, maybe spilling the envelope's secrets already, or selling them to God knows who. And this USB, what was it? A weapon, a shield, a bomb that could blow her life apart? She could hand it over, walk away, keep her career intact, or she could crack it open, see what Hargrove had risked everything for, and damn the consequences. Karoline stared at the drive, her smirk faint but real. She'd lost the election once, survived the fallout, built herself back up. She could handle this too, whatever it was. But not tonight. She slipped the USB back into her pocket, turning away from the plane. "What now?" she muttered, the words hanging in the air, simple and heavy. The tarmac stretched ahead, a blank slate, and she started walking, her steps steady but directionless. The truth was hers to hold, for now, but what she'd do with it, no one, not even her, could say.